The humorist and author Calvin Trillin once said, "Math was always my bad subject. I couldn't convince my teachers that many of my answers were meant ironically." I always loved that comment, but it occurred to me that if you want to see real irony in this field, try listening to adults who say very freely, "Oh, I was terrible at math and I always hated that subject." And then in the next breath, indignantly want to know why their kids aren't being taught math exactly the way they were taught math. Maybe because you are Exhibit A for the failure of drill and skill math instruction? About 15 years ago, I came across a book by Joe Boaler, Joboaler, called "What's Math Got to Do with It?", in which, among other things, she mentioned that having attended a progressive school in England, she never had to learn her times tables, and then added that that lack never adversely affected her as a student, later as a math teacher, and then as an eminent leader in the field of mathematics education. That struck me as interesting, and it rang true for me. Joe Boaler has written a couple of other books since then, one called Mathematical Mindsets, and another published more recently called Math-ish. She has taught in universities in England, but for most of the last couple of decades, she's been on the faculty of the Grad School of Education at Stanford. Her research group's website is ucubed. That's youcubed.org. I wanted to talk to her about how kids get math sense, which she talks about as far more valuable than memorizing math facts and algorithms and practicing them to death. I wanted to know which aspects of traditional math education she thought were particularly counterproductive and why, and why this approach persists given that it holds so many students back. Is practice overrated? When is it okay to estimate? How do you assess understanding rather than memorization of formulas to produce the right answer? And I got answers to those kind of questions, as well as new questions that I didn't have in mind. An extended conversation with Professor Joe Boaler coming up right now on this episode of Kohn Zone. I'm Alfie Kohn. Joe Boaler, welcome. It is such a pleasure to talk with you today about math. I came up with a sentence I found in an old book by Jerome Bruner, the great progressive thinker who helped really jumpstart the idea of project-based education and the whole idea of scaffolding and so on. So he tells a story about a boy who, thanks to his father, had acquired exceptional math skills. And on the first day of school, the boy felt obliged to, and I'm quoting now, demonstrate his prowess by multiplying two large and ugly numbers on the board, announcing, "I know a lot of math." He was probably our best student, but he made no progress until he got over the idea that what was needed was hard computation. That's the end of the quote. Does that ring true for you, the idea that not only kids, but teachers and parents have to get over the idea that math is mostly about memorizing math facts and knowing algorithms before they can do real math?
Absolutely. I think we have a lot of evidence now that the best way to learn maths is conceptually through big ideas, through making mathematical connections. And the approach of memorizing is associated with low achievement. We have a lot of data on that, comes internationally as well as nationally. So, yes.
Yeah. Well, what you do that's so interesting, especially in your latest book, Math-ish, is to take the term mathematical diversity and use it in two different ways to refer to diversity the way it's talked about politically in terms of issues like race and gender, but also to talk about a diversity in the way math itself is done. Can you say a bit about the latter and also about how the two are connected?
Yes. What I mean by mathematical diversity is that mathematics really is a diverse subject. There's a lot of forms of mathematics, but also different ways we see maths, different ways we understand it. That's the most valuable part of teaching mathematics. The most valuable part of mathematics classrooms is getting students different ideas, asking them how they see things visually. And when we teach mathematics in that way, it sort of explodes into this amazingly diverse subject that moves forward from student thinking and student visuals. And so that, it turns out, when we teach maths in that way, which I sometimes refer to as a more multidimensional maths, that involves, numbers, but also words, speaking, visuals, physically building things, moving. That multidimensional maths opens the doors to many more kids. So it brings about more equitable outcomes. Many more students can achieve well. It also just brings higher achievement for students.
But when you get past the idea of these mental blocks, I can't do math, which is particularly a problem for girls and women, and the systemic blocks, especially for people of color, there's a tendency to say, if we use all these diverse approaches, then we can make advanced math the way it's taught now more accessible. In other words, responding to equity concerns, offer all students high-level content. But is the high-level content, the way math is taught, especially at the high school level, worth doing? Are we focusing so much on accessibility so that everybody can think of themselves as doing this and do it successfully, like deflecting the critique of what it is we're teaching and whether that needs to be reexamined?
Yes, I absolutely think it is, actually. And we have a new sort of paper we're working on that talks about, we've tried all these initiatives to get kids doing better. We've tried culturally responsive pedagogy. We've tried, teaching in different ways, and we still have so much failure. Maybe it's the maths that we need to look at. And the standards have a lot to do with kids' failure. They are packed with content. And teachers generally, many teachers say, I would love to teach my kids in depth. I would love them to have discussions and be drawing visuals. I don't have time. I have so much to get through. So yes, we need to change the mathematics in the standards, and high school needs the most change. High school standards are packed full of content that students will never, ever use in their lives. So definitely, but people may have seen the furore that came about when the California Maths Framework just gave some teaching ideas. And the pushback we get just from different teaching ideas, changing standards, changing the mathematics. We need to do it, but there's going to be opposition.
Do you know Paul Lockhart's A Mathematician's Lament, his critique of high school? Are you pretty much in alignment with his challenge to that?
Yes, love Paul Lockhart's
When you talk about the standards as the problem, you don't mean the NCTM standards, right? You mean what states are expecting teachers to do?
The state standards, which, for most states, it's Common Core math, which was put into place, 12 years ago now? The mathematics in the world is changing. One of the initiatives I've been involved with is trying to bring more data into teaching, more data science, giving kids an option to take data science in their high school years. That gets a lot of pushback because people are so afraid to have anything change inside mathematics. But we need to change those standards. It would be great if we could do more what other countries are doing that are much more successful.
Well, how much of that pushback is due to general conservatism, don't change the way things are tradition? and how much of it is due to an investment in the particular way that math is taught now and our expectations, and how much of it is due to a conflation of harder with better. In other words, if we teach kids statistics and so on, which is useful in daily life, that's not as rigorous as calculus and the march to calculus. So there's three different hypotheses
all of
here.
those, I think, are involved. But I would say with maths, we have something special going on. And this works in this way in maths and not any other subject in school. Calculus is often thought of as the top of the tree.
Right.
It is the only AP course where you can only get to that course if you're advanced in middle school or elementary school, because there are more courses in front of calculus than there are years of high school. That simple fact causes a whole lot of inequity in the system. So districts have to give kids algebra in middle school to get them to calculus, which means they set up different pathways when students are in 5th grade or 4th grade. And hence we have this highly inequitable system. Only 16% of students in the US take calculus in school. And if I were to show you which students they are by their demographics, the racial background, socioeconomic, you would be horrified. There are some people who want to keep the system that way. It is a system that's built on privilege. Privileged kids get to go ahead. The rest are pushed out.
Yeah.
Some people are very happy with that. They were the kids who got pushed ahead. I mean, if you look at the pushback on the framework, it almost exclusively came from high achieving maths people who had benefited from that system. They also know how to get their kids through that system.
Right.
They didn't want it changed. So I think you have the combination of, okay, we have this math system. It's probably the last subject that people can sort of buy their kids through in schools. So we've got to hold on to that. And then,
how do you mean buy their way?
Well, if maths is all about racing through the system and it's all about doing well on narrow tests, then tutors can help with that.
Yeah, yeah.
If maths is about thinking and reasoning and problem solving and students' own ideas, not so much.
I wonder how much is due to an idea that goes beyond sexism and racism and classism, and just the idea that excellence is by definition something that only a limited number of people can attain.
It's a meritocracy. We provide these very high standards, and we say you have to get there in the US.
Right.
And people think that. They think, oh, we have to keep calculus. We have to make calculus the filter because it's really hard. And statistics, data science, as you say, people think it's not so hard, maybe much more valuable. So there's a lot of that. In the writing of the California Maths Framework, we redefined the word rigor. And we said, what is rigor? Rigor should be that students can take a mathematical idea and use it and apply it in the real world and be adaptable with it. It's not, I can repeat lots of difficult methods you've shown me. It's being able to use that knowledge and apply it.
Yeah, I guess, or an alternative is to let them have the word rigor and then reject it in favor of something else rather than redefine it. Right?
That would also be a good outcome.
When people say, well, kids need to know their math facts, is the problem with that just that they overemphasize the importance of memorizing the facts, or should we challenge the whole idea of what it means to know? The notion of understanding is coming from something that's passively absorbed as opposed to actively constructed. I mean, when you talk about diversity in math education, you talk about flexible thinking, being playful, seeing patterns, number sense, reasoning, all that stuff. The way I like to put it is when kids are working on a problem, we want them to think about what it makes sense to do next, not what you're supposed to do next. Right? All that stuff. Does all of this imply a word that you don't use, as far as I can tell, in any of your books, which is a constructivist approach to understanding. The idea that mathematical knowledge is created actively. Or do you mean something else? I'm curious why you don't use the word constructivist or constructivism, and you don't ever quote the leading people like Connie Camille, who's a student of Piaget.
Yeah.
Is that because you differ from this approach?
No, not at all. And I think I do quote Connie Camille in different papers I've written, maybe not in books, I don't know. There's a lot of people doing good things, but
sure.
The constructivism, I mean, when I was starting as an academic and doing my PhD in London, constructivism was already being torn apart by people. Constructivism means that kids just invent their own methods, is what people put out there, which of course we know that's not what it means. But so I tended to avoid terms that might set people off and get them thinking the wrong thing. But yes, it is a constructivist approach. It is about students reasoning and thinking, having their ideas at the center. And with maths facts, I mean, I feel both of those proposals you made are correct. They're not that important to have memorized. But if we did think they were important and we value kids very quickly coming up with math facts, then there are a lot better ways to memorize them than what we would call blind memorization, rote memorization. You just memorize these facts. I learned maths facts myself. I never did a multiplication test. I grew up in the progressive era of schooling in England. But I learned math facts by playing games and seeing them often and understanding how they work. I never did what many people are made to do in the US, which is blind memorization
of the multiplication
that has never
table.
held me back for a moment in my maths career. So I think there's too much emphasis on math facts. They're not that important. And even if we do think they're really important, there are better ways to learn them.
You can pick them up without cramming them into memory, right? Well, when you talked about constructivism as being misrepresented as kids inventing their own method, I was a little surprised because isn't, in fact, that part of it? It's not all of it. There's a theory underlying it.
That's right. It's part of it. It's not all of it. I mean, I think a constructivist approach my favorite approach to maths, I guess, is giving kids a rich problem where they're, thinking, figuring things out. They may invent a method to go forward.
Yeah.
But inside that rich problem, teachers can teach them some things which might be a formal method. We open the space for kids to discover things, but we don't hold back on sharing something that will help them move forward.
When you say you don't hold back on sharing, do you mean you think it's okay to teach young kids algorithms?
I'm not a big fan of formal algorithms. In fact, I think they've done a lot of damage in our math system.
Yeah.
I believe that kids should understand what they're doing and use strategies that help them move forward. And I am a fan of having kids learn rich mathematical strategies. Algorithms, they can be helpful in life, but I don't think kids should learn algorithms before they understand the concept. And they certainly shouldn't learn the concept through being taught an algorithm.
Which is what's normally done, right?
Well,
If indeed the concept is there at all, as opposed to just parrot math. Camille says that knowledge is invented by each child. It can't be discovered or learned by transmission, except for the superficial stuff like notation. She says, quote, children can be taught to give the correct answer to 2 + 3, but they cannot be taught directly the relationships underlying this addition. So her notion of holding back on the algorithms isn't just a strategic choice so much as a reflection of her conception that mathematics must be invented, in effect. Is that something you would agree with?
I mean, I do agree with what she's saying, and I think kids have to make sense of mathematical relationships. I don't think they have to invent how to perform trig calculations. but I think they need to understand and make sense of them themselves. And certainly you can't, I mean, I would agree, you can't teach a relationship to kids. You have to give them opportunities to develop that understanding.
Is the example you gave there accidental, or is that important to distinguish between elementary and high school there? Trig is not the same as little children constructing the idea of place value or equivalence.
Yeah, I think there is a difference as you go up through the grades, because kids can, and I have seen them do this, discover for themselves how to find the area of a shape by, tiling it and seeing that there's a relationship. But they're not going to discover sine, cosine, and tangent formulas. Now, we can still have them really understand those well. And I had a really clear moment when I was doing my study for my dissertation, where I was watching in one school teachers teach all these trig formulas, and then students work through exercises. Is this sine? Is this cosine? Then in the other school I was in, the teacher gave the students the question, if I had 36 fences, what is the biggest fence I could make to enclose animals in a farm or whatever it might be? So the students get to work on this. They're trying different shapes. They're doing all sorts of things. Some of the kids notice that the biggest shape is a 36-sided shape. And they realized that they could find the area if they made 36 little triangles, but they didn't know how to do that. So in that moment, the teacher showed them, you can use this thing called trig. And the kids were so excited by this. The teacher actually showed like a group of 3 kids. Those kids ran to other kids in the room and said, let me show you something. Let me show you something. I know how we can find the area of these triangles. And they thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a sort of the bedrock of progressive education is kids' desire to find out has to come first. And then they have a reason. It's for a purpose and in a context, right? And also, I guess, separate from that, and also separate from the question of the extent to which kids are actively constructing, is the extent to which the focus is on the idea, the meaning, the understanding, as opposed to a sequence of steps that have to be undertaken. I mean,
exactly,
you talk at one point in calculus about the idea of infinity, and that's very different from just, okay, get ready for this particular skill.
Here's a method.
Here's the method.
I know. I taught calculus at Stanford a few years ago to incoming undergrads.
Yeah.
And many of them, maybe 2/3 of the class, had taken calculus in school. The other third hadn't. And so that's a teaching challenge as a teacher.
Sure.
But I decided to teach through big ideas and rich connections, and kids had physical objects, and they were cutting up lemons to work out the volume of complex shapes. Afterwards, the kids who'd taken calculus, absolutely all of these kids said, this is the first time I've understood it. I took calculus in school. I did all those methods. Now I understand what I'm doing.
How many students even know that they are supposed to understand? I mean, part of the way traditional math is, the message you get is you don't have to understand.
You don't have to understand. It's all about tricks and methods that you memorize. And how many kids think that in the US?
Right.
Sadly, probably most of them.
Yeah. And you can understand why they would come to that conclusion. So your new book you call, which rather daringly, I think, math-ish. Do you know the comedian Bob Newhart, who died recently? He started out in life as an accountant, and he used to say, when I learned that accountancy was not right for me, it was because my view is always, if you get within a few bucks.
I like it.
Now, why is that line funny? It's funny because that's not what we expect an accounnt to do. We expect precision.
Yes.
So it seems almost like you're trolling the traditionalists by using a term like math-ish to indicate that it's what they have been assuming we're doing, on the progressive or constructivist side as sort of fuzzy math. Getting close is good enough. And your response to that is what? That When is estimating okay, and how do you help kids to learn when it's okay?
Yeah, I knew when I called the book Mathish, it would wind up the people who were
Right.
already hate everything I do.
Yeah,
I
right.
did have that sense as I was doing it. But what the book is about, or some of the book is about, is just really highlighting the importance of kids estimating.
Okay.
And we know that if kids estimated more, they would develop number sense. There's all sorts of research showing it's valuable.
Uh-huh.
But I know that kids hate to estimate in classrooms. They think, oh, it's just another method. Why am I doing this? But once we say to kids, what's your ish number? It just unlocks them, and they're more willing to share, and they're more willing to think conceptually.
What's your
So,
ish number, meaning what estimate did you come up with in this problem?
kind of. So, one of the things I say in the book, many maths teachers lament the fact that their kids don't have number sense.
Yeah.
So they'll dive into calculations. They'll come up with bizarre answers. They don't
right.
question them. So my proposal is just ask the kids before they do the calculation, what would be your ish answer to this? So what that does is it gets the kids thinking ishly, but also thinking kind of conceptually. Before they dive into those details, we're finding it really impactful in classrooms. I like to illustrate it with the one example that I have in the book. This was a question given out across the whole United States in NAEP. Kids were asked, you have 7/8 and 12/13. What is the closest answer going to be? Is it 1, 2, 19, or 21? So 7/8 is close to 1, 12/13 is close to 1. Most of us would say the answer is 2. The most chosen answer in the United States was 19.
Huh.
And the second was 21.
Really?
So these kids, we know what they're doing. We can hold our heads and go, oh my gosh, how do they get 7/8 plus 12/13 is 19? But we know that they're adding numerators to get 19, or they're adding denominators to get 21. They're trying to remember these formula they were given. If they had had an experience of ishing numbers, in a second, they could have told you that that's 7/8 and 12/13 is closest to 2. So I know precision is important in maths, but we're kind of a little out of balance in classrooms. It's all about precision.
Yeah.
We don't value this ish thinking enough.
And the impact of overvaluing precision is that we end up teaching specific techniques allegedly to elicit that precise answer, even though you have no idea what the hell's going on.
And often make mistakes and don't even know you've made them.
I was fascinated to see some of the early research on constructivist math teaching in elementary school. Do you know the group at Purdue, Wood and Yackel and Paul Cobb and so on?
Yep.
Really interesting stuff. The kids who learned the constructivist approach made errors, but they were clearly calculation errors, whereas kids taught in the traditional way, even by skilled teachers, made ridiculous mistakes because they didn't see that they were ridiculous.
They don't see it. Yeah. And we see that all the time. Even the high-achieving kids, they're so thinking they dive into the precise methods and they lose sense of the numbers. So my book is really about bringing that number sense back to kids with an easy sort of way of doing that. And I've been sharing it at different conferences, and I've had lots of people say, somebody said to me, my dad was a rocket scientist, or is a rocket scientist, and he laments the days before they had calculators because they used to ish the calculations. And they would figure out whether they were right or wrong. Now they just use technology, and sometimes they make big errors. So people who say, okay, this is ridiculous. Of course, engineers and rocket scientists and accountants need to have 100% accuracy are missing the point.
Right, yes, right, right.
And of course, I've already had horrible reviews from right-wing papers saying this is ridiculous. Math can never be ish. So this is really speaking to educators who understand. But some people want to not understand, of course.
And for those who do want to understand but don't yet, it offers you an opportunity to explain the difference. And also to explain, presumably, that estimating or coming up with an ish is just one aspect of the movement that you're promoting here, right?
Yes.
In other
and
words,
it's only a tiny bit of the book.
or it's a symptom. To be able to offer an estimate implies that you understand the concept, which in turn implies that you are learning the concept and not just the technique, right?
That's exactly it. And of course, many students can't come up with estimates, and that's why they calculate and round them off. And that's just a symptom that they haven't got number sense.
Right.
So, as you say, it's just a part of the book. There are lots of different ideas in the book.
Of course.
But it was a fun title to put out there, I thought.
You're right. Thumb in the eye kind of thing. Yeah. And I think it was another one of your books, you talked about stopping people on the street and asking them to talk about their experience doing math as a kid, whereupon they all started talking about their performance in math class, how well they did.
Where they were ranked.
So I want to ask you about that, because this is something I have given a lot of thought to, is the difference between teaching and learning that's focused on performance, on how well you do, as opposed to focused on the learning, which is what you're doing. And I'm wondering if that fundamental divide is there, that would go beyond just the question of how we assess, or let alone how often we assess. Do you see people in math who seem generally to get it, meaning they're on the same page with you and thinking about moving beyond the traditional approach, who nevertheless are still getting kids too much to focus on how well they're doing in math?
Definitely. I mean, I'll just mention a website called UCubed, and we have millions of people coming to our website and using the rich tasks and all the things that we have on the website. But still, they're inside this performance culture, and high school teachers are inside it more than anyone, and so are their kids. So they don't want to, many of the people who come to us don't want to be inside that culture.
Yeah.
But when they try and make it more of a learning culture and not all about performance, they get pushback from parents, they get pushback from all over the place. So, yeah, many people think maths is all about performance. What you're referring to is when we interviewed people in San Francisco and said, what do you think about maths? Or I can't remember what the exact question was now. Tell us about maths. And immediately they started ranking themselves. This is where I was in my maths class. And I was like,
that's the way they were brought up.
There is no conception of maths outside of it is used to rank me, to give me a number, to put me on a list. And that is so sad. How did maths ever become that subject, that it's just all about performance and ranking?
Well, it isn't only. I mean, here's where a broader perspective of education might challenge the idea that just reflects a problem with the way math is taught, because schooling in general is not about the learning typically in this culture. It's about how well people are doing with that. And trying to change it may connect with something you were saying when we started talking, which is that the people who perform very well may be loath to challenge a system in which they think they've succeeded, even though they may not have succeeded at really understanding, but boy, are their test scores high, right?
Right. That's true. And some people say that. I hated math in school.
Right.
But we're not going to change it. It's still, going to be the same to see if my kid can get to that top place. It's, it's definitely true of schooling in general, although a lot of educators are doing something different, and we love them and are very happy about that. But it is true that of schooling in general, that it's focused on performance, often at the expense of learning. It's just maths is the most severe example of that usually.
Possibly, yes. You're big on the idea of metacognitive stuff, where you think about how you're thinking, but if it means flexible or self-aware, sure, that makes sense. But often I find that we invoke the idea of metacognition to mean taking your own temperature, using rubrics, and doubling down on the whole idea of constantly thinking about how well you're doing.
Yes, it's not that. It's
It
not
shouldn't
meant
be
to be
that.
that. It's not meant to be that. No, I've been interested the more I've sort of delved into reading about metacognition, that because I know that most people out there think metacognition is thinking about your thinking. But actually, when people are metacognitive, it means they approach tasks in a more reflective way. They have different strategies they can bring to tasks. They don't look at a maths question and think, oh, I just have to be able to solve that. They think, what strategy might I bring to this problem? How might I work on it? So it's a more reflective way of being. There is that reflecting on your own thinking is part of it, but it's also being able to employ effective strategies and approach tasks in a different way. And I do really think we need to teach kids how to learn maths. I actually teach a class at Stanford that's called How to Learn Maths. And it's always gets lots of undergrads who come to it, and they're very, very glad that they have come to it. And it teaches kids, that we can approach maths using really important strategies. And so I teach lots of different people, undergrads, but also school children, and lots of different situations. I always think you have to start as a maths teacher by recognizing the kids probably come to you with significant maths damage.
Yeah.
And you need to unpack and undo that before you can get into any maths.
Especially the ones like that boy Bruner was talking about, who thinks he's ruling the roost because he's so good at it, meaning computation. Of course, the British are way ahead of us Americans. You do maths, whereas we only have the one. But let's talk about practice for a moment. Some kinds of math practice are clearly better than other kinds, of course. You talk a lot about the kind of practice that's not very useful, which is where you're just applying the algorithm mechanically to 50 problems and have to bring a lot of them home. But to what extent is practice, is rehearsal really necessary or useful at all, even the good kind, at yielding understanding? I mean, to practice helps reinforcement. The only thing that can be reinforced is a behavior. Understanding can't be reinforced. So to what extent do we need rehearsal in order to really understand the ideas?
Yeah, no, I'm not a fan of practice for practice's sake.
Yep.
And I know that kids, to learn maths, you have to do maths. That's what lays down pathways. You can't learn maths from watching somebody else do maths or listening to somebody tell you maths. You have to do it. So we can agree that we want to give kids opportunities to do maths, but my favorite homework, for example, which is where a lot of teachers say, go away and practice, do 50 more of these, is to switch that homework with reflection questions where kids are asked, what did you learn today? What was the big idea? What did you struggle with? How might you use what you learned today in the world? These get kids actually reflecting on the ideas, way more beneficial than do 50 more of this. If you want to give kids cool projects to do that get them applying the ideas, then that is probably a productive form of, you could call it practice. It's not really practice, it's more application. But yeah, that's repetitive. I mean, I had kids, my own two daughters went through high school in the US. So anybody who's had kids go through high school in the US has seen their kids stay up night after night going through exercise questions.
Yep.
For my own children, they were so exhausted by that point late in the evening. The idea that they might be learning anything from dredging through 50 examples, all it did was make them go to bed 2 hours later.
Well, the kids who already understand, don't need anything after the first problem or two, and the kids who don't understand aren't being helped, right? Seems like a lose-lose. And then then when they're done, we test them, and we often give them timed tests, which values speed Do we
Values the
overvalue that across the
speed.
board, or is that just a reflection of the kind of tasks?
Yeah. I mean, most people who've gone through maths in school think that to be good at maths, you have to think quickly to answer maths questions in timed situations. But when does anybody ever do that in the real world?
Right.
They really don't. So why are we making kids do that? Why is that the judge of how good they are at maths? There is a whole set of kids who are deep thinkers, who don't respond well to speed and time tests.
Yeah.
And actually could probably be the greatest mathematicians in our country or world. But they're pushed out of doing well in school because of that deep thinking. So yeah, the whole idea of measuring everything with timed tests, I don't agree with. Of course, that also gets me haters, because the people who
are good at it,
the people who don't like the maths we share also want kids doing time tests in schools.
Do you think there's something else beyond what we've already talked about that would explain why they value that particular method of assessment?
I think it's things we've talked about. They were able to do well with time tests. They know how to train their kids to do well with them.
Yep. So they do it well.
Yes.
Let's talk about mistakes. I saw that on a classroom wall when I started visiting classrooms. Mistakes are our friends. And the idea of embracing that and even being happy to look at that, as you talk about in your writing, I understand that, but I wonder if that can turn into a kind of tendency to romanticize failure in the way that social conservatives emphasize that failure is good for you. Because I don't know if you've seen that as well, that even the idea of creating more thoughtful tasks, project-based kind of things where you're not going to succeed at the beginning, has to be sold. I'm thinking of a particular researcher who does this here, not as student-centered, deep-thinking education, but as failure is beneficial, and that kind of comports with and further drives the idea that kids today have it too easy, and they would benefit more by screwing up and picking themselves up and dusting themselves off and saying, by golly, I'm going to try harder next time. Do you think about these distinctions when you talk about an issue like mistakes being potentially beneficial?
I hadn't thought about it in the way that you're talking about, linking with that kind of thinking. I mean, I just know that one of the problems in maths classrooms is kids are afraid of being wrong.
Yeah.
And when they do make mistakes, they feel badly. They decide they're not a maths person, and it all goes downhill from that time onwards. And of course, we know that the best learning experiences are actually when you're pushing at the edge of your understanding,
right,
making mistakes, correcting them, moving on, making more. You're really in that zone where your brain is very active, and it is good. It is a good sign if the people make mistakes, and celebrating them takes enormous pressure off kids. So I'm sure that people could critique it in the sense of the ways you're talking about it, but I've seen how valuable it is. Now, I do think we have to live that message. We can't just speak it. So if you're sharing with kids that mistakes are valuable, but every test you give them, they get marked down for every mistake they make, then that is, that's an oppositional message, and it's damaging for kids. The study has shown that it is worse to share with kids that mistakes are good and then punish them for making mistakes than to not share anything at all.
But I worry that we think we can solve a problem like that with kids criticizing themselves for not getting everything right by just adopting a growth mindset, a new attitude about it, rather than understanding that the problem is with the whole right answer focused approach to education and the structural things that lead to that. Carol Dweck would like to see kids look at a worksheet where they have a whole bunch of problems and say, by golly, if I try hard enough, I'll bet I can succeed at this. And as opposed to saying, why does anybody have to do this garbage? And the more you're focused on the mindset, the less likely you are to challenge the curriculum. Do you see any
I get
of that?
I've seen your writing on that. I quoted actually, and I agree that mindset, the idea of telling kids mindset messages, is not the answer and is possibly going to take an emphasis off changing the system, which we need to do. But what we do on our website and through our other work is really share that message. You want kids to have a growth mindset? We need to change how we teach them. We need to be giving them growth opportunities and valuing that growth. It's not about sharing with kids. Feel good about doing this, awful worksheet. It's about changing that worksheet, because that worksheet itself is giving fixed messages to kids. So I'm totally with you on that. I don't think mindset is valuable unless it's part of it infuses your teaching, changes the way you teach. And that is the message we give. We're not about just say different words to kids.
Yeah, good. All right, okay. And all that we've been talking about, you think, is valuable for kids of high, medium, and low ability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kids who think of themselves as bad at math, first of all, have just accepted that message because of the kind of math that's been taught, as opposed to the kind where they can succeed at. But you've taken a great deal of heat, to put it mildly, and been a subject of vicious attacks, in part for your suggestion that tracking kids is not beneficial, that we can detrack schools and have kids of different proficiencies learning together. How much of that is because you think that kids on the low end have been trapped by the system and everybody can be at the high end? And how much of it is because even if kids still differ in their capacities, it still makes sense to teach them heterogeneously?
I guess what I communicate is research from schools that have detracked and have brought about really great higher achievement, more equitable achievement, and kids who feel good about themselves. And I don't actually say all schools should detrack or everybody should do this, because I know it takes careful teacher learning. It takes a lot of things. So I would make the statement we should not be tracking students in elementary school.
Yep.
And I would also make the statement that we know how to teach detrack classes in ways that are really successful for high and low achieving kids. And yes, I think kids will always be high and low achieving. I don't think we're saying, let's detrack and then everyone will be the same.
Okay.
I just don't think we need to recognize that kids are different places by putting them into different classrooms and giving them different teachers. Skilled teachers can give more open problems that kids take in different directions. The high achievers take them much higher than they would in a tracked, narrow math class. And low achievers are also able to take them to, the really good places. But it's, so we know how to do it. It would take significant teacher training and education to really bring it about well. I was in Norway and Denmark last week, and I asked the educators I was with, what ability grouping do you use? And everybody, of course, just said none. We just we don't have any. We don't have that idea. There are some teachers who will say, why don't we have it? We should have it. But it's just not part of what they do in those countries.
Even in high school?
Even in high school, they just have none. They've figured it out. But here, the US is one of the most heavily tracked countries in the world.
Although there are other countries where they do a different kind of tracking, whereby sixth grade or so, some kids are being siphoned off to a career path already that will lead to different kinds of instruction as well, right? It's not just...
I think there are some countries that still do that, kind of vocational schools. but they're not Scandinavian countries.
Uh-huh. Well, how successfully can you detrack until the math instruction changes along the lines of being about understanding?
Well, in higher levels, I don't think you can detrack without changing the way you teach maths. I think if teachers put all the kids together in one class and then taught narrow math, that would be a disaster. And many of the kids wouldn't be able to access it, and other kids would be bored. You have to change the way you teach if you're going to have more heterogeneous classes. So that's why it's a big initiative. I would never make a broad sweeping, everybody should detract, because I know that wouldn't work.
Maybe it also depends partly on not only what you're teaching, shifting to the kind of number sense curriculum you've described, but also the way you're teaching within the classroom to have kids in pairs and small groups that are mixed with peer tutoring going on, as opposed to detracking where everybody's, even with a great curriculum, just sitting there working by themselves and listening to the teacher.
Exactly. It's complicated, but we can learn from schools that are doing great work with this. And I've always in my career wanted to share the great work of those schools. And that's where I've come under heat. People have tried to discredit my research, say that it's faulty. They don't want to hear about schools that have done well with detract systems.
No, successful counterexamples are very threatening to people who want to cling to the status quo, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you see do you think about the implications of many aspects of this that, I don't know if you've sensed this, but I've been nudging throughout this conversation to thinking of it beyond math, because I'm interested in other topics as well. And of course, math education is your specialty, but I think of the way, say, the emphasis on performance rather than learning, the emphasis on memorizing facts and practicing skills rather than understanding ideas plays out with other topics as well.
Absolutely. Whenever I present the presentations I do around the country, other subject teachers always come to me and say, I wasn't sure if I should come, but everything applies to my subject. Yes, absolutely. These are ideas and things that we know work, that work in all subjects. Actually, I often think if maths teachers taught more like English teachers, we would be in a lot better place than we are now. But
what's an example of how you think English teachers do it better?
They invite students' ideas. They want to hear, I've had good English teachers in my education, but they want to hear from different students and build on the thinking. They don't tend to think that some students will never get it. They don't have those kind of deficit ideas about kids, usually. My coworker, Kathy, had terrible English experiences and doesn't think like that about English at all.
Yeah.
And I have to say, when I came to the US, I was a bit horrified by this 5-paragraph essay.
Oh, gosh.
That everybody seems to do. I was like, wow, I would have hated that in my English class. But these ideas go across all subjects. It's really not just about maths. But here's the thing I do think. If people can see that maths can change, they really can see that you can do it in every subject.
It's like if they can get rid of homework in high school, you can certainly, or grades, you can certainly do that in elementary school, and similarly across disciplines. If you can understand that the purpose of math is to understand the ideas rather than simply to be a human calculator on legs, maybe you can invite English teachers to stop teaching stuff with right answers, like what's the definition of a participle,
Right. Yes. I didn't have that kind of English experience.
Lucky you.
Lucky me.
An early childhood educator named Lillian Katz said something that I've been thinking about for many years, and maybe we can wrap up with your thoughts on this. She said, we overestimate children academically, especially young children, and underestimate them intellectually. The idea of an academic goal versus an intellectual goal strikes me as potentially very powerful. What would that mean in math?
In math, well, I think that also really speaks to the idea of focusing on learning over performance. The academic goals are these performance standards that have been prescribed, and what we want kids doing is thinking. It is that more intellectual pursuit, critical thinking, going deeply, and that is, in our country, different from an academic achievement mostly. So I like that.
Well, thank you so much, Jo Boaler, for all your work in this and the heat you've taken to try to make math something that not only is something everybody can do and find joy in, but that can be reframed so it's something worth doing and can speak to us as people and as citizens, and not just as people, young people taking a test. And thanks so much for taking the time with me today.
Thank you. Yeah, no, always a pleasure, Alfie. And thanks for the great conversation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.